The Radical. Fundamental principles of freedom, rational self-interest, and individual rights. This is the Yaron Brook Show.
All right, everybody, welcome to Yaron Brook Show on this Saturday, August 5th. Hopefully everyone's having a fantastic summer and a good weekend, and looking forward to a great week ahead of us. All right, so we are going to tackle two issues today. Neither one of them I'm looking forward to. But, okay, so we're going to start with the first one, and we're going to talk about Richard Hanania for a little bit. I'm not particularly eager to talk about this. I have to admit, I feel like I'm going to talk about this a little too early, although I'll tell you why I've gotten over that. So there's a breaking story about Richard Hanania that we're going to talk about. And I don't like to talk about breaking news because you don't have the time and you don't have all the information and the commentary that comes afterwards. But I'm pretty comfortable that I've got enough to say here, given what I know, and kind of given what Richard has posted since this news has come out, that there's enough to talk about. This is not a pleasant topic. The only reason I'm doing this is that I have, for a year now, 2 years maybe, talked very positively about Richard Hanania and encourage you to read him, encourage you to go to his Substack. I have retweeted some of his tweets. I've retweeted a lot of his tweets. So I feel obligated to let you know what's going on with him, and to kind of think aloud, if you will, about lessons learned from this. All right, so let's get to it, right? So Richard Hanania, as you probably know, is a public intellectual out there. He has started his own think tank. He is a scholar at the Salem Center at the University of Texas. He is taught at the University of Austin. You remember that university that was started as an alternative university. He has published in the New York Times, in the Washington Post. He has delivered lectures to the Federalist Society. He's been invited to do a teacher course at Stanford later this year. He has got a book coming out that on woke culture. He's been on Tucker Carlson twice. He has become an incredibly successful intellectual on the right. He's on his podcast. He's had world famous people. Elon Musk has favorably tweeted about him. His book has blurbs from Peter Thiel and many others. Anyway, he's an up-and-coming rising star on what you would kind of consider the right, although again, as you'll see, he's not easy to pigeonhole into a particular place. Anyway, so rising star, lots of interesting, lots of stuff. He's written a lot of stuff. He's published a lot of stuff. Anyway, yesterday, the Huffington Post, not a publication I read, but in this case, I read the article. The Huffington Post had an expose on Richard Hanania, revealing that in about 10 years ago, somewhere around from 2008 probably until 2012, during that period, Richard Hanania used the persona of Richard Hoste, Hoste, and was a regular poster and a regular blogger and a regular writer of articles on pretty much every racist website out there. I mean, some of the worst, most horrible places that you could imagine. I'm not going to mention names, but just really bad stuff. This Richard Hanania, now we know, was advocating for anything from against mixing of the races to basically sterilizing anybody with an IQ below 90, right? IQ below 90, and of course, as part of that, mentioning and highlighting the fact that would be mostly black people. That is, that this involved mostly blacks. His rants, his essays, his articles, his posts, his comments are now well documented. They're out there, and yeah, I mean, this guy was an out and out, unequivocal, horrible racist of the worst kind, a defender of white supremacists. Now, what's interesting about Hanania is that, whether you want to call him white or not is questionable. Hanania is a Christian Arab from half Palestinian, half I think either Lebanese or Jordanian or Syrian. I can't remember, but he's not your standard, what you would consider standard by, I don't know whose definition, but whatever it means, standard white person. But this is who he was. This is between 2008 and 2012. He was expounded some of the most ugly, racist ideas that one really can imagine. And hobnobbed and was cited by Richard Spencer and all the big names on the racist right, on the racist, I don't know, right, left, on the racist spectrum, and was part of that entire community, I guess you would call it, that entire world, and again, as ugly as it gets, right? As ugly as it gets. And then it looks like he stopped, right? And kind of went to school. He got a BA. He got a law degree. He then got a PhD from top-notch universities. He had a postdoc. He had a postdoc at Columbia University. So he fit into academia quite well. In his postdoc, I guess his dissertation was on American foreign policy and the inadequacies of American foreign policy, much of which his critique of American foreign policy I agree with, much of which I don't, but much of which I do. He reemerged, if you will, with using his real name, Richard Hanania, sometime just before COVID, but really became a big hit during COVID. He wrote the first piece that really got him attention was a piece on why liberals are winning, why liberals are everywhere, why liberals dominate, why the left dominates. And his conclusion was, really two things. One is they care more, they're more engaged, they work harder, they get out there and do stuff. They're engaged. They actually show up, if you will. They care about ideas, if you will. And the second one is, he argued they're smarter, they're better educated, they're better connected, and those two things explain why the left dominates American cultural institutions. That's the first piece I read of his, and to a large extent, I thought he was right, and I thought it was a really good piece, and that's the first time I started engaging with Hanania, not knowing anything about this past. He obviously never revealed it and never expressed it. The second piece that really made a big name for him was a piece on civil rights law, on how civil rights law led to today what we know as DEI. And led to a large extent to woke culture, Again, I thought it was an excellent piece. It was not completely new, but it was an integration in a presentation that was new and I thought important and true. And a good article, one of the best I'd seen. On the topic. Over the next few years, he picked up a lot of subscribers. He's got 20,000 Substack subscribers. He's got a Substack account. He's got a lot of followers on Twitter. He's doesn't do well, I think, on YouTube and other platforms, but at least on those platforms, he's done phenomenally well. And as I said, he is part of the Salem Center. He is part of the University of Austin, and he's very, very well entrenched within this world of right of center. But he's not typical right of center. This is what's interesting, right? And this is what I have to say. It fooled me, right? Even though there were signs, and I'll talk about those signs in a minute. He's pro-immigration, very pro-immigration, very, very, very. He has expressed in his, at least from what I've seen, disdain for the Republicans' focus on immigration, for the Republicans' focus on keeping people out. He is pro-abortion. Now, that might turn out to be consistent with his pro-eugenics old views from 10, 15 years ago, but he's pro-abortion. He was very anti-Trump and anti the whole MAGA phenomena, and I thought in a smart way. And he was also, while he started out, he's supposedly an expert on foreign policy, he started out being tentatively sympathetic to Russia. He quickly flipped and became quite strong on Ukraine, very critical of the right. Anyway, a lot of very appealing views. But there was always something about his writing. There was always something that kind of always snuck in about him that I have to admit I didn't pay enough attention to. And I will try never to make that mistake again. So even though he had some really good articles and some really creative stuff and some original thinking, things that snuck in were things about IQ. And generally, I think now that anybody who talks about IQ a lot is probably hiding some real racist agenda. I just think that the discussion of IQ is so silly and so primitive and so superficial that it's hiding something deeper. It's hiding something deeper if you're really, really, really focused on that. So he kept mentioning IQ, and that kept coming up. And IQ turns out to be really, among so many people, just another word for black people, right? Low IQ equals black people, and therefore we can discriminate against them because they were low IQ people. The other thing was that once in a while he would mention characters who are unequivocally, clearly, unambiguously racist. Mark in the chat mentions Sailor. Sailor is one of these people that, and once in a while Hanania, so I didn't know who Sailor is. I had to look it up today and figure this out. But it turns out Sailor's, one of these alt-right, explicitly racist website writers and so on. The other one is Ron Unz, U-N-Z, who is very active in Republican politics in California, who has run for office several times in California, done fairly well in California as a writer, and who is a unapologetic anti-Semite, Holocaust denier, just a mishmash of a lot of things. Because on the one hand, he, like Hanania, celebrate diversity. On the other hand, Hanania hates blacks and appears to hate blacks, and Unz hates Jews. Not appear, hates Jews. Is a Hitler, I wouldn't say sympathizer, but apologist. He's got a whole thing about Hitler's misunderstood, and Hitler didn't know about the Holocaust, which didn't really happen, and Hitler was really a good guy, and all this, right? All this stuff. This is Unz. This is a big shot in Republican politics in California. Well, I wouldn't say a big shot, but at the margins, right? At the margins of Republican politics in California. But has run for office several times and has done, marginally for a Republican pretty well. So today I was thinking, all right, I'm going to wait and see what Richard Hanania actually writes. Because, if he comes out with this statement of something like, I've changed, I repudiate all those views, I was wrong, I'm sorry to have, I don't know, if he just comes out and apologizes and everything, I would say, okay, do I believe him? There are these hints, there are these indications maybe he hasn't changed. That's one thing. So I was curious, what is he gonna do? Well, he's only posted one thing since this article hit. And by the way, he knew the article was coming because Huffington Post contacted him and asked him for comments. Right? Asked him for comments. So he knew it was coming, so he could have prepared. So the one thing he posts today is an article. It's almost like a story because I don't think it actually is an expression of something that actually happened. I don't know. He mentions a lot of names here, and I don't know if these names are real. I don't know if this event ever happened. But it's something where it's called Ron Unz Confronts the Far Right. And basically, so in response to the Huffington Post article about him being a racist, he basically posts something where Ron Unz goes in front of a bunch of racists, clear-cut, unequivocal racists, very influential racists. He names names here. Again, I don't know if these are real names. Maybe they are. One of them is a former White House official, James Felix. And Ron is defending, is saying, "Oh, you racist! You all, this is dumb. Ethnic diversity is a good thing, and your real problem, hint hint, doesn't really say it, but your real problem is those people who've been around here since 1619, right? Why 1619? Because of the whole 1619 project about slavery, blacks." So Unz is basically saying, your real problem is blacks. It's not diversity. We love diversity. Diversity is great. Diversity is what made this country great. Diversity is not a problem. This is what Hanania puts up today. And of course, Hanania is bored by the racist, but he thinks Ron Unz is really interesting and fascinating. Now you go to the Unz review, UNZ, if you might want to shower afterwards, and you can see the horrible, horrific, disgusting anti-Semitic stuff that he puts up there. So Hanania is basically saying, yep, that's me. I'm more sophisticated now. I don't actually argue directly for eugenics. I'm more sophisticated now. I don't directly argue for, white supremacy because maybe I think there's value in a diverse society. I still hate blacks, he says. And, he's basically implicitly saying, and, by association with Unz, he's saying, I hate Jews. But, yeah, what they said about me is true. So that's why I felt like I could speak about this today, because it seems to me pretty unequivocal what's going on here. The guy is clearly a racist, even if he's a more sophisticated racist now than he was 10, 15 years ago. he still is a racist, even though he couches it now in a much more intellectual framing. He is a racist in spite of the fact that he is, and this is, I guess, true of racists, really, really smart. He couldn't have written what he's written if he's not. Really, really smart, and actually correct about a bunch of stuff. That is, you can be a horrible, racist. You can be truly horrific and disgusting and still be smart and still write things that are true. I don't quite get how that happens. I don't. I have to admit, I find that a little bit of a cognitive dissonance. But I guess you can't really keep it up. And this story about, this is called Ron Unz Confronts the Far Right. I guess he published it in March. Reveals that you can't escape it. And I've seen a bunch of stuff, and these are the stuff that I don't retweet of Hanania's, that seem just a little off to me, that seem just a little suspicious to me. And I guess you can't keep up the facade for very long. And even if it might have happened, even if the Huffington Post had not done this expose, if you will, he would have been discovered. Yeah, I mean, Hanania, if anything, was a big looked like he was a serious DeSantis fan. Because he's a huge anti-woke person. His new book is all about DEI and woke and how evil it is and how it needs to be combated. And he was far more sympathetic to DeSantis than he was to Trump. But, God. Anyway, he fooled a lot of people. Steven Pinker was on his show. Mark Andreessen was on his show 3 times. And so on. His new book is about woke, so it's all about woke. So, maybe he thought it was in retreat, partially because of what he was doing in order to combat it. I also think it's in retreat. It's factual reality that it's in retreat. It doesn't mean it isn't still damaging. It doesn't mean it's still not out there, but it's clearly in retreat. You saw that, and I've said this many times, in Virginia. You saw that in San Francisco. You saw that in Minnesota. You've seen it over and over again. But anyway, we're not here to debate whether woke is in retreat or not. But Hanania is... Anyway, it'll be interesting to see what happens now. It'll be interesting to see what happens, whether people will distance themselves from him, whether his various affiliations will be severed, whether some people on the right will defend him, and if so, who will defend him? Barry Weiss was one of the people who was affiliated with him in one way or another. I don't know how strongly. It's hard to tell. Again, he taught at Austin, University of Austin, but I don't know the Barry Weiss, how involved Barry Weiss is there. I just don't know. But it'll be interesting to see what does Mark Andreessen say, what does Peter Thiel say. These are all people named in the article. What does Barry Weiss say? So far nothing. I've been surprised. Even people it's interesting because the spillover is pretty wide. Even like Matthew Iglesias, who's left of center, who had some exchanges with Hanania that seemed fairly friendly or positive. He at least has distanced himself from Hanania on Twitter. But he's like the only person I've seen so far who was called out, who's actually said something about Hanania. Anyway, I do not intend to promote any of his work anymore. Unless some new information comes out to show that everything is wrong and he's completely changed. People do have free will, and but he's clearly not done that by the fact that what he tweeted, what he published today, is just a disgusting story. And even though he expresses anti-alt-right views, he expresses other it basically expresses other pro-racist, anti-Semitic views that are equally disgusting. So, lesson learned, few lessons learned. One, that's it with IQ for me. I mean, anybody who raises the IQ issue is hugely suspect. And in my perspective, the burden is on them. Don't trust them one iota, right? And I know there's some pretty prominent people, and at least one who I don't think is racist, but pretty prominent people who've raised this issue. But burden is on them. It's a horrible issue. It's a stupid issue too. I mean, if you really think about it, if you tested people in the 16th century, people, I don't know, Ashkenazi Jews who score really high on IQ tests, in the 16th century, what do you think their IQ would be? If you give them the test from today, what would their IQ be? It would be very low. Of course, culture matters. Of course, culture matters. And the idea that this is genetically, idea that this is ingrained, idea that this relates to race, that this color of your skin determines your IQ, is just horrible. Ashkenazi Jews have become smart because they embraced a culture that elevates education and thinking and debating and argumentation and smart stuff. It's a cultural phenomenon more than anything else. And everybody who is going to continues to insist about this being an issue of race is no longer. Of course, tests are culturally biased. Of course, culture impacts tests, right? Of course they do. I mean, is there any question about that? You have to be completely blind and evasive to not see that culture plays a role. Just take any test that you give today and give it to somebody 100 years ago, 200 years ago, 500 years ago, 1,000 years ago, and you will see that you get wide different responses. Why? Because the level of knowledge, the culture, the attitudes, the perspectives are completely different. And that's why, standardized testing is, I'm not for standardized testing, never have been. I'm for private education with real competition, where different schools test kids in different ways. And universities, each university comes up with their own test to give students. But biological determinism is ugly, it is disgusting, it is wrong. It is wrong. And it is blatantly wrong. It's not a question of whether individuals are smarter than one another. Of course, there's differences in intelligence. It's a question of what determines that. And it's a question of whether you know how to measure that, whether you know anything about how to measure that. Anyway, we'll do the IQ. Anyway, so one is IQ, one lesson learned. Second lesson learned is notice the quirks in somebody's position, right? Look out for the quirks. Look out the IQ, quoting, or saying something positive about somebody like Ron Unst. Give a lot more weighting to things like that. A lot more weighting to the suspicious stuff. And don't give people as much of a pass. I should have been more alert to some of those issues. Anyway, I am now officially, formally distancing myself, not that I was ever close to him, but distancing myself completely from Hanania, from what he stands for, and I hope many, many other people do. I hope to the extent that he continues to hold these views, that his career is destroyed and that he is shunned. To the extent that he continues to be embraced by conservatives, that'll be an even more negative sign in terms of our culture, in terms of where our culture is heading. All right. If there are questions about this, I'm happy to take them. Don't forget, we are way behind on the Super Chat. I guess this topic is not a topic that encouraged you to ask questions, but feel free to ask questions on this, on anything. Jump in with questions, mainly $20 questions. We're half an hour in, and we've got very, very little, very little here. JJ Jigby says Brian Kaplan always retweeted him. So did I. So I'm not going to judge Brian Kaplan based on the fact that he retweeted him when I did the same. So I'm going to assume Brian Kaplan was as fooled by him as I was, and is going to learn the lesson that I just learned. And yep. We will continue to we'll work on fine-tuning our radars to identify creeps like this and the horrible ideas that they articulate, even when they might have good ideas at the same time. And I've said this before, and let me say it again just to be very clear. I consider racist ideas to be the lowest of the low. I consider them to be some of the most disgusting, horrible, horrific ideas possible. I will not, I have no interest in sanctioning, being associated with anybody who holds racist ideas, right? And this is true of people on the right, and this is true of people on the left. If you hold this race as primary, I want to have nothing, zero to do with you. And to me, this, as Ayn Rand said, it is the lowest, most primitive form of collectivism possible, and I consider collectivism to be, as low as it gets, right? Collectivism is the enemy, certainly politically. So if racism is the lowest form of collectivism, I hate racists kind of in particular more than anyone else, right? I know exactly what racism leads to. I know the horrors that result from it, and I have no interest in any association with anything that is associated with them. And again, I think that it is a phenomena that it turns out, and this is another lesson learned from this, that is, I think, bigger than we think. I think it's a real problem in America. I think it is a real challenge for American society, particularly on the right, but it's being fermented on the left as well. We've got them, must have attracted racism in the title, must have attracted some people. So, yes, collectivism is natural, inevitable. No, it is not. It is the default state of an animal, not of a human being. It is the default state of lack of cognition, of somebody who stays at the perceptual level. It is the default state of not rising to be civilized and to be human. Civilization, among other things. Civilization is the process of individuation. Civilization is the process of identifying the individual as the value. Every civilization in human history that is worth anything was a step towards greater respect for the individual and a denunciation of the idea of collectivism. So collectivism is the enemy. It's the enemy of civilization, basically. It's the enemy of civilization. 99% of our history, we lived in collectivistic societies. That's right. That's right. The 1%, which is the 1% that matters, the 1% that counts, the 1% that actually achieved civilization, rejects collectivism. And I'm pro-civilization. You might be pro-savage. I'm pro-civilization. You guys, I'm just responding to the chat. You guys can go and create your own savage society and eat each other up and enjoy the violence. Me, I'm working towards civilization, which means individualism, which means cognition, which means the mind. All right, let's see. We've got a few questions. Again, I encourage you guys to ask and to support the show. You're not going to get, I don't think you get a lot of this kind of a level of honesty and authenticity and willingness to say I was wrong on many shows out there. So join us, right? Or support that. Value for value, as we often say. Let's see. All right, the second topic is another one that, well, this is really interesting, and this is a topic we'll probably keep returning to. And this was generated from an article that was written by Konstantin Kisin. I don't know if you guys know Konstantin Kisin. He is a well-known blogger, a podcaster in the UK. He is, he's been on, I think he's been on Lex Friedman. He interviewed, what's his name? The guy on the left that everybody likes, or doesn't like anymore. Anyway, he's a big shot out there, and he wrote an interesting piece called "The Atheist Delusion." The Atheist Delusion, right? By the way, again, Konstantin Kisin, very good on a lot of different issues. Very anti-woke, very anti-crazy left, very anti-Russia, pro-Ukraine. So good on a lot of things. He wrote this piece called "The Atheist Delusion," and the piece is really kind of talks about the fact that when he was growing up, he was exposed. He's got a show called Trigonometry, right? And he did the famous interview, which with Sam Harris, right? Sam Harris. So Trigonometry is his show. Anyway, he's got this the Atheist Delusion, and obviously this is a reference to Dawkins' book, The God Delusion. And when Kisin was growing up, he was exposed and a big supporter and really interested in the then very, very popular and growing movement of new atheists. If you remember, new atheists really came to the forefront in the late in the 2000s, post 9/11, with their attack on Islam, and then more broadly with their attack on religion. Of course, Dawkins wrote The God Delusion in 2006, but Sam Harris was, of course, part of this. Hitchens was part of this. Dawkins, if you don't know, is the writer who writes a lot about evolution, wrote The Selfish Gene and The Blind Watchmaker. But others were part of this. Daniel Dennett was a philosopher who was part of it. But it was the four horsemen were considered Dawkins, Hitchens, Harris, and Dennett, and they were considered the new atheists. And they wrote extensively about not only about the kind of that religion was wrong, irrelevant, but they often wrote about the evil of religion and why religion was destructive both at a societal level and destructive both but also on the individual level. And the destructive was that religion was something negative, and as a consequence, a lot of people, I think, became atheists. These guys were hugely popular. They attracted thousands of people. This is Jordan Peterson phenomena before there was Jordan Peterson. It made Sam Harris. Sam Harris was relatively unknown before the new atheists really took off, and because there were four of them, they kind of fed off of each other. They supported each other. They did events together, and it became a substantial, significant movement, which has, interestingly enough, petered out. But the consequence of that movement are all around us. We've talked about this on past shows. The poll after poll show that both in the United States and in Europe, religion is in the decline. That religion is going down. That more and more people consider themselves atheists. more and more people consider themselves non-religious, even if they won't call themselves atheists. More and more people, even if they're religious, they're not affiliated with an organized religion. So what you have today is that atheism and the critique of religion that the new atheist provided has had a real impact. It's had real imports, and changes out there in the world have indeed happened. It's affected both the United States and Europe. And this has created an interesting kind of, over the last 3-4 years, maybe a little longer. But over the last 3-4 years, there's been a certain backlash against this among people who really supported the new atheists in the past. The new atheists would be good. They kind of fizzled out, but their impact remained. And Kissen, who I mentioned, was one of them, and he became this big shot. But the reality is that Kissen now doesn't call himself an atheist anymore. Another well-known atheist, who I think was influenced by the new atheists, but has really changed, is Dave Rubin. Both now argue that religion is important. The religion is necessary. We don't know exactly what their particular religion actually is and what religious stance they actually take, but they argue that religion is necessary. And both, I think, and I haven't really talked to Dave Rubin about this, but from what I've read and what I've seen of what he says and what he's written, both take the position that really the problem is that once you become an atheist, you lose the concepts of good and evil, you lose the concept of truth and falsehood, you lose the concept of justice. And this is a quote from Kissen's article. The central positive feature of the religious worldview is to ensure that human beings do not see themselves as the sole arbiters of truth and justice. That having torn God down from his pedestal, we do not put ourselves in his place. So what religion does is it prevents us from having the arrogance, Kissen tells us, that we should be the arbiters of truth and justice. That we should put ourselves on the pedestal that belonged previously to God. Well, certainly if God doesn't exist, who else is going to be on that pedestal? If God doesn't exist, who else is the arbiter of truth and justice? Who decides what is right and what is wrong? And at the end of the day, they have no answer to that. They don't want to see people put themselves on their pedestal because they're scared, they're petrified of what they'll actually do. Indeed, they think they know what they'll do. Basically what I think Kissen, and I think to some extent Dave Rubin, or maybe to a large extent, I don't know, blame much of the new left on atheism. That it is atheism that it gives us woke. That it is the problem with the new left is that they have placed themselves as arbiters of truth and justice. And hey, we have no, they tell themselves, right? We have no argument against that. What are we supposed to say to them? How are we going to argue against them? So they run to religion. Because religion removes man, you, me, from that position of deciding what truth and justice is, and puts it in the hands of a fictitious being. And somehow they feel strong with that. They feel more confident around that. They say. I mean, and this is, Kissinger, blames the Stalin and Hitler on atheism, right? I mean, this is so ahistorical. It's stunning. But here's what he says about Hitler and Stalin. And you can think about this as woke and left and everything that they hate, right? Their ability to rationalize their actions and to persuade other people to support them was a product of the sense in which, in the absence of God, we get to make up whatever rules we want. Without a worldview in which we are all worthy of dignity and respect, by virtue of being children of God, we have to reinvent that particular wheel through the UN. I mean, God, where do they get this stuff? Now, so let's just start with a fact. And God, I don't have enough time to really cover this properly. We'll have to come back to this whole issue. But let's just start with the fact that Christians and Jews and Muslims have slaughtered people in mass for thousands of years. The Old Testament has no conception of human rights. The Old Testament has no conception of human dignity. The Old Testament is all about slaughtering those who are not Jews. Christianity put to the sword. What was it? The famous God, I can't remember his name. Anyway, how many pagans did Christianity put to the sword? Tens, hundreds, millions, hundreds of thousands, millions? All in the name of what? They wouldn't convert. They wouldn't convert. Islam, all over the Middle East, in Asia, in India. Religion has been far deadlier than any ideology in all of human history, if you take into account the percentage of the population whenever they were killing. The bloodiest war probably in human history was the 30-year war in Europe, where Christians were killing Christians because they didn't agree on the Trinity, on whether, when you take that piece of thing in your mouth, it is truly the flesh of Christ, which would make you a cannibal, or just a metaphor for the God. They slaughtered each other over this. This is a reflection of respect for human rights, for human dignity. The only killers are atheists. Where does somebody like Kissinger, who is well educated, smart, where does he get this stuff? Yeah, if you look at the 30-year war as a percentage of the population of Europe, how many people were killed? How many people were killed? I think you will find that it's a larger percentage of the existing population in World War II or World War I died in the 30-year war. And in some ways, more brutal, hacked to death, burnt to death. I mean, just horrific stuff. Because that's how you fought back then, right? And that was Protestants and Catholics killing each other. So I don't get that. I just have no concept. It's as if before communism and fascism, the world was at bliss. Just this amazing peace. Indeed, it was. I'll get to that in a second. During the period of capitalism, during the period of a political manifestation of the Enlightenment, it was at peace. But pre-Enlightenment, part of the motivation that drove Enlightenment thinking, I think, to think the way they did about religious freedom is because of what they saw happening. I mean, again, Kissinger is not ignorant. He certainly writes like he is. I don't believe he is. He says, and this is maybe his answer to what I just said, right? It is extremely easy to prove that religion is evil, but I'm not convinced that proving it causes more evil than its absence is quite as easy. So he's saying, yeah, maybe religion is evil. Maybe you're right. Christians slaughter a lot of people. Religion slaughters a lot of people. Islam slaughters a lot of people. But is getting people to be atheists, is it going to reduce the amount of evil in the world? Well, first I'd say the answer to that is yes. Knowledge is a good thing. Knowing what is fantasy and what is truth ultimately is a good thing. Even if some people will abuse that fact. Even if some people will use that fact to achieve evil. Overall, diminishing falsehood, diminishing evil out there, exposing evil is a good thing, not a bad thing. Always a good thing. But then, yes, we must find a proper way of living. So, Kissinger goes on to say, irrespective of how scientifically true religion may or may not be, it is nonetheless both useful and inevitable. Both of those are not true. How can falsehood, how can lies, how can deception, how can mythology that affects every aspect of one's life be useful? And it's certainly not inevitable. It's certainly not inevitable. He says the absence of old religion seems to produce only a vacuum into which a new religion rushes in. And now he's talking about the left, right? Whether it's communism, whether it's wokeism, all of those. He says the reason new atheism has lost its mojo is that it has no answers to the lack of meaning and purpose that our post-Christian societies are suffering from. What will fill that void? Religious people have their answer, do the rest of us. Now, here I agree with him completely. We must answer the question of meaning and purpose in a non-mystical, non-arbitrary, not emotionalist way. We must provide answers to what truth and falsehood are and how to discover them. We must provide answers to what good and evil is and how to know. We must provide answers why it's absolutely appropriate. And it can only be that man as an individual for himself is the arbiter of truth and justice. That is the role of philosophy. That is the job of human knowledge. That is the role of ideas. So, absolutely. The new atheists, Kissinger, they present a challenge. What is going to fill the vacuum created by religion? Now, I believe the vacuum in and of itself is a good thing. It's a step in the right direction. Destroying one evil allows us to at least not have to deal with one evil so we can discover truth. And there's only one way to discover a proper morality, a proper way to live, a proper way to function in a community, as a society, among nations, among individuals. And that is the use of logic and reason. That is the use of our mind. That is to embrace what we are as a human. We are the rational animal. It's to abandon our past as perceptual, animalistic, collectivist tribalists and to embrace who we really have the potential to be, individual human beings with a mind to guide us, with logic and reason to discover what is good and what is what is bad, what is right and what is wrong, what is noble and what is evil. There is no gimmick out there. It is wrong to replace one God with another. And if one understands that fundamentally religion is about emotionalism, that fundamentally religion is about leading with one's feelings, with one's emotions, that collectivism fundamentally is an abrogation of one's own personal responsibility to one's own life, to one's own responsibility to think for oneself, then you can reject all the so-called secular religions out there, whether it's wokeism or communism or certain forms of fascism, as equally evil to the old religions. Religion is religion is religion. Emotionalism is emotionalism is emotionalism. The random, the arbitrary is random and arbitrary. The only standard is reality. The world out there. And our job is to figure it out, to learn about it, and to use that knowledge to figure out what's good for human beings and what's bad for human beings, and then to dedicate ourselves to using rationality to pursue the good. It is not an accident. Not an accident at all. And the more I read about this, the more obvious it becomes. And I'm reading a really good book right now on the culture, on cultural entrepreneurs, you can call it, from 1500 to 1700. It's not an accident that you get the Enlightenment, which brings a respect for reason, individualism, and political freedom, and ultimately peace, nonviolence. It's not an accident that comes to the foray as a kind of outcome, as kind of a generated from the age of science. The development, the discovery of science, the elevation of science, the integration of science into the culture. Because science is the most obvious manifestation out there for most people of reason. It is the application of reason to solving our material needs. So you have to have a scientific revolution in order to get a political revolution. You're never going to get the founding fathers without Isaac Newton and Galileo and Copernicus and the many, many, many hundreds, thousands of scientists who worked between 1500 and 1776, maybe even a little before 1500. A renaissance and enlightenment have to happen for America to be created. In that sense, have to happen for us to have the tool and the proper understanding of what good and evil really are. Morality comes from understanding the world out there and using the tool we as human beings use to understand the world out there. All right, so the challenge that the new atheists created is to provide answers to the questions of morality, meaning, and purpose. The answers to those questions lies in philosophy. The answers in those questions lies in you applying your reason, your rationality to your life, to the pursuit of your values, to achieving the best life that you can achieve. Your life, an individualistic life. All right. Yeah, we've gone for an hour. That's good enough. Let's see. All right. We are way behind on the support of the show. So I just want to remind you again, this show exists because of contributions you guys make. Some of it monthly that you make on Patreon, and I encourage you to continue that, and some of you to join Patreon and support the show, or on yaronbrookshow.com/support, which is through PayPal. But please provide support that way. But what we usually do in the live shows is we use the live shows to do some fundraising through the Super Chat feature that YouTube provides. So please consider supporting the show using the Super Chat feature. It's right there underneath. It's got a $sign. You can do a sticker for $2, for $100, for $500. We are short about $450 right now. Or you can ask a question. Asking a question is great because it steers the show in the direction you want. $20 questions get priority and get more attention. So please consider doing a $20 questions or a sticker or a $5 question or whatever you want in this trade, value for value. I produce the content. You guys consume it, and some of you pay for it. Papag for $20. Thank you, Papag. Writes, your recent autism video, I mostly agree, but you missed the rise in autism is mostly high functioning. High functioning is now, you missed the rise in autism is mostly high functioning, but then you say high functioning is now a slim majority. Oh, in terms of total. The PC decision in the DSM-5, I don't know what DSM-5 is, to combine ASD hurts those who are low functioning. So I'm not exactly sure what the comment is, but let me see. I think I get it. What you're saying is that certain decisions were made to take high functioning autistic kids and lump them in under the same category as low functioning autistic kids, and that is hurting the low functioning because they're getting fewer resources and less attention devoted to them. And I mean, that makes sense to me. It even might be why we're seeing such an increase in autism is that, and I got a lot of feedback like this from people that the definition of autism has changed. People are now being categorized as autistic that weren't before. Partially that's in the high functioning area where people used to not be diagnosed with autism at all, but just because they were high functioning were left alone. But it's also at the lower end where there were lots of other categories that represented mental deficiencies that were not identified as autism. And now because autism is a spectrum, a lot of those other mental deficiencies are now roped in under the autistic category. So yeah, I mean, sure, there's a lot more to say about autism, and I am not an expert, so I did the best with the resources I had. But yes, I'm sure there's a lot more to say, and I'm sure there's a lot more nuance, and the data is probably more complex in terms of what is going on with autism. I still stand by most of what I said, and I think you agree with me, Papag, about most of what I said in the show. But there is quite a bit of nuance in terms of the numbers and in terms of the distribution, and I wouldn't be surprised if it's true that there's a skewing that leaves the lower functioning kids with less resources because autism is viewed more and more as a high functioning kind of phenomenon. Well, Elon Musk has autism, so how bad could it be, right? I mean, that kind of attitude. Thank you for the support. Thank you, Shelley. Thank you, Catherine. I know I got a bunch of stickers before. Mark, Antonio, Mike Dial, and Ryan. And then, of course, Wes did $50. Thank you, Wes. So thank you, all of you, for the stickers. Stickers is one way in which you can support the show, value for value. So keep them coming. We still got a long way to go. All right. John says, you've discussed Bronze Age Pervert on a past show. There is a mainly biographical article about him in the September issue of The Atlantic by a former acquaintance of his. Yes, I saw that, that Bronze Age Pervert still is being elevated. And I think he will be for a while because there were a lot of, well, I'll get to that. I saw the article. I started reading it. I haven't gotten into it a lot. I did see there was somebody who knew him, gave his name, which I can't remember, but he's Romanian, in origin. That accent that you see is a Romanian accent. So yes, I did see that, but I need to read the whole article. But look, BAP, Bradley Thompson from Clemson University has been on the show a number of times, one of those times to talk about BAP. As Brad has documented, BAP, Bronze Age Pervert, has had a pretty significant influence on graduate students within political science departments. And a lot of them are becoming fans of Bronze Age Pervert. And again, Bronze Age Pervert this is a type of Nietzschean primitivism, a kind of, a hearkening kind of, I'm sure they love Andrew Tate, because it's a kind of attitude of a Bronze Age man's man, wielding a sword, riding a horse, shirtless, just like Vladimir Putin maybe, and raping and pillaging. That should be, and treating women as, well, putting them where they belong, right? In that kind of world. So Bronze Age Pervert is a critique of everything the modern world represents, and a hearkening back to a barbarous civilization. And it's stunning how many primarily conservative, right-wing intellectuals, starting with at the Claremont Institute and then on to a variety of different departments around the country, where graduate students and even some professors have become hooked on this stuff. And this is all part of the right's critique of modernism. And that includes a critique of capitalism, and that includes a critique of technology, and critique of the modern world and the modern environment, and a hearkening back, maybe like Black Eagle, to a primitivism. And that's when life was worth living, which is stupid and horrific, and it's the same as, somewhat same as Knowles' hearkening back to 1220. Right. And Hobbes had it right. Life, and you can, life was short. It was nasty. It was brutish. It was horrible. It was horrible. And if, what was, it was, that was it. It was horrible. And instead of embracing and enjoying and celebrating the amazing life we have today, people want to go backwards. There are always people who want to go backwards. Call them conservatives. This is the funny part about conservatives supporting capitalism. In the 19th century, the conservative movement was dedicated to rolling capitalism back, because we lost the community and the villages and the people working close to home and the connection to the soil. And, so we had a life expectancy of 30. And so children, 50% of children died before the age of 10. But those who survived, what? And of course, capitalism moved people away from God. Moved people away from God. Right. I mean, the world today, human life today, I mean, I've said this many times and I'll say it again, it's never been better to be alive than today. It's what you make of it, of course. Some of you are miserable. That's fine. Some of you are obsessed with all the problems and all the difficulties. But it's just unbelievable to be alive today. With the knowledge that we have today, and the technology that we have today, and the quality and standard of living that we have today, and the ability to grow old and healthy like we can today, and I mean, the ability to travel and see the world that we have today, the ability to experience art from all of human history that we have today, the ability to go and hike and camp if you want to connect with nature that we have today. People in the past didn't, 300 years ago, with few exceptions, didn't go hiking. They were just barely surviving. So yeah, Bronze Age Pervert, because of that, his ability to penetrate through the right into universities and political science departments academics is going to be with us for a while. It's going to be with us for a while. It's so this hearkening to uncivilization, to the lack of civilization, to barbarism, and seeing barbarism as beautiful, I mean, which is not something you can refute, right? Because it's so obviously, at the very basic level, evil and wrong. Yeah, I mean, that is what we need to walk away from. And the fact that BAP is popular, the fact that the right is enamored by him, and a bunch of other intellectuals like him, suggest how corrupt American right is, right? Not to say the American left is not corrupt. I think that too. But yeah, unbelievably corrupt. All right, Andrew, why can't those who you speak of fathom an alternative to an epistemological ruler? Even those who know there's an alternative in Rand's theory of independence and objectivity mostly reject it in favor of a ruler thoughts. Well, I mean, I think it's a lack of self-esteem. It's a skepticism that is an epistemic skepticism that comes from Hume and is really with us solidly in our culture, even among better people. It's this idea of how can I know? I mean, it doesn't occur to them to say, how does God know? Or, wait a minute, how do I even know God exists? If I don't know, how do I? Because you don't need to know. You just need to feel. It really is. It's ultimately a lack of self-esteem and a lack of, a lack of trust, a lack of awareness of, an evasion of the awareness of the efficacy of reason, the efficacy of their own mind, and a kind of. They lie to themselves, just like, somebody like Black Eagle in the chat here can lie to himself and develop a huge, sophisticated theory of lies about why life was better in the Bronze Age than it is now, which is just on its face ludicrous and bizarre and stupid. Right? But yeah, and usually it's smart people, because to develop that kind of system of lies, interconnected floating abstractions that is not connected to reality at all, requires brain power. Yeah, this is why I don't put much on intelligence. I mean, the people on the far left are often very intelligent, and the people on the far right are often very intelligent. And intelligence in and of itself is not a criteria of goodness, and it's not a criteria that you will discover truth or you will discover reality. It's actually often a proxy for the ability of people to self-delude and to live under delusion. So they want a ruler because they don't trust themselves. They want a ruler because they don't have self-esteem. They want a ruler, they want a collective because they know that if they just go by their emotions, which is all they think they have, then they will fail, which is true. So they need safety. See, emotionalism leads to fear. Rejection of reason leads to fear as a dominating emotion. Because you know you don't know. And somebody who is obsessed with fear, overwhelmed by fear, looks for comfort. Comfort in somebody else's certainty. The comfort in a group, collectivism, or comfort in a God, religion. Anything to escape himself. Anything not to rely on his own judgment. Pedestal. Put himself on that pedestal where he has to judge. So fear is what drives them. They don't necessarily recognize it. They won't admit it, but that's what drives them. And it's fear of judging and fear of being judged. Fear of being judged. I mean, the beauty of Christianity is it gives you forgiveness. You can be judged, but then you ask for forgiveness, and it's all good. People are really afraid of judging and being judged. So it's all of that. Lack of self-esteem, ultimately. Jennifer says, how do these people reconcile the fact that many different religions often offer totally opposite views of morality? How do they think one chooses the correct one? They don't really bother with the correct one or not correct one. You need something outside of you in order to establish good and evil. Yeah, you don't want to be extreme. You don't want to be an Islamist, but you could be a moderate Muslim. You don't want to be a religious fanatic like a Christian fanatic, but just an average Christian. You need just to take from Christianity what God wanted you to take from, probably according to them, is just good behavior, 10 Commandments. Just do that. So as long as you're not taking these things to extreme, you're fine. I mean, that's their perspective. And therefore, if you look at all religions, when they're not taking the extreme, they all agree you shouldn't murder, you shouldn't steal, you shouldn't covet your neighbor's wife. The 10 Commandments are a pretty good proxy that all religions can latch onto. As long as they don't overdo it, just as long as they're moderate. Yeah, and they delude themselves into that. But that's how they hold it. I mean, you take a rabbi and a priest and a mullah and a I don't know, Hindu or Buddhist or whatever, and they all basically agree on stuff as long as they're middle of the road people. They're not at the extremes of their religions. All right, Richard says, Rand wrote that art fulfills the needs of one's consciousness. Beyond that, I think that fulfillment realizes internal meaning. I think that fulfillment realizes internal meaning. The intersection of value, purpose, and clarity. What do you think? I think that's a hard question. I think that's right. I think that art makes it possible for us to discover meaning and to hold meaning and purpose. So it fills this need that our consciousness has, in that it concretizes our most abstract ideas. And one of those ideas is meaning, the meaning our life has. And I think, and this is why I think part of the problem in the culture today is that we have such horrible art, if you can even call it art. Most of it's not even art, right? That we have such horrible aesthetics. That past generations, the advantage they had is they got some of that meaning, some of that purpose from the art they experienced, to the extent that it was good art. And we don't have that. This world doesn't have it. So I do think art serves that purpose, and why I think art is so important to living a good life. And to having meaning and purpose in your life, and to be able to identify it. You can identify it in the art that you love, in the things that are beautiful around you, in the projection of those ideals. And this is the power of Ayn Rand, right? To project an entire universe to you, and in that way give you purpose, help you create your own purpose and meaning in your life, right? So, look, meaning is in you. You have to discover it. It is, the meaning of life is to live it in pursuit of your values, and discovering those values is aided hugely by aesthetic, artistic experiences. Austin says, how would an objectivist tech entrepreneur handle woke employees, media, and ESG investors like BlackRock? how would they protect their intellectual property from being copied from other large tech companies? Well, I mean, I think we still have a pretty robust, just the last part of the question, we still have a pretty robust intellectual property system in the United States. You sue, you see these lawsuits all the time in the newspapers, small companies suing Apple, suing Google, suing larger companies for violation of intellectual property, and you see them winning all the time and getting huge awards. So the way you protect yourself is through the legal system. That's what we have a legal system for. Lawyers will take on your case on a contingency basis, so you don't have to put money up front, and it's a way. Now it's not great that it's not perfect because it takes time, and it takes work, and it's diversion from your entrepreneurial activity. But it's all we have is a legal system to protect you. Right? How do you deal with woke employees, media, ESG investors like BlackRock? Well, I mean, if you're a founder, then you get to decide who you hire. And you can, in a variety of subtle ways, hire the people you want to hire. Hire the people you think you will get along with. Hire people you think you will philosophically aligned with you. And I believe that today, as a tech entrepreneur, the best way to deal with media ESG is just stand up to them. Is to stand up to them once you're successful. So as you're growing, you're going to have to put your head down, not deal with politics, not say anything about ESG, not say anything in the media. Hire the people you want to hire, but use your criteria for that hiring. But once you become successful, I've said this many times, I think CEOs should stand up and say what they think. I think they should challenge the BlackRocks. There's plenty of capital out there. And BlackRock, if you're successful, if you're going to have positive returns, they'll invest in you. They'll pretend you're ESG and they'll invest anyway. So I think entrepreneurs need to stop being timid and afraid. I think one of the things that Objectivism would give a tech entrepreneur when they get into that position is hopefully the courage to stand up for themselves. Again, once they're successful. Now, look, I don't want to minimize the challenge. There is a real challenge here. And I know Objectivist tech entrepreneurs who are out there trying to deal with this. And granted, it's not easy, right? You're going to have employees who are, and you're just going to have to find ways to handle employees who might be woke or ESG concerns of your investors without compromising and at the same time without alienating them. And that is a challenge as you build your company. I think once you're successful again, I think standing up to the bad ideas is something that is worthwhile and something that will pay off. But in the process, you're going to have to figure out how to juggle these things as part of the challenges of the modern world. Not a good challenge, not one of those exciting challenges. It's a shitty challenge, but it is what it is. And you're going to have to find a way how not to alienate or find a way to let those employees go without, of course, creating a big storm around it. But you've got to just handle it with, depending on the circumstances, in a rational, thoughtful way. I mean, you got to think about how does the wokeness manifest itself? How what context is ESG? What context is all these things coming up in? And then handle it based on the best of your ability and divorce yourself from the person if that is the only solution and work with them if there are other solutions. Thank you, Jonathan. Jonathan Honing, thank you for the support. Jonathan, you the sticker to support the show. We're halfway to our goal. Better than where we were half an hour ago, but still only halfway. So there's still a bunch of money to raise in order to achieve our goals. Goals are important. It represents how the show is doing and what value you see in the show and whether we're on the right track or not. All right. Ollie W. Ollie W says, what are your thoughts about Nigel Farage having his bank accounts closed because he had the wrong political ideas? I mean, I think that's pretty stupid and horrible of the particular banks doing that. Now, I'm not sure that was true of the first bank. I think the first bank that kicked him off, he really didn't qualify. He was no longer as rich. It was a bank that only serves the ultra-rich. But it turns out that other banks, it looks like, denied him accounts because, I mean, I think it's stupid for the banks. I think that they have every right in the world to do it. And if you're a slightly more rational bank, then you should pick up Nigel Farage's account and bank him. Farage has some offensive views that I don't like, but he's not bad, so bad as to be completely shunned by entire society. But you know, I think that some bank is gonna, you know, there's gonna be a lot of people who are pissed off by this, and I think those people could be banked at a bank that takes Nigel Farage's money. Right? I don't think there's any evidence they were doing this to appease the regulators. I haven't seen any evidence to suggest that this was government policy. These were politically correct people at particular banks. All right, let's see. I mean, a lot of people upset at Brexit, even people who voted for Brexit, are now regretting that and upset by it and pissed off. And since Farage is the number one person associated with Brexit, I think it's a lot of people in institutions taking it out on him. I don't think he deserves it, but they certainly have a right to do it. Michael says, is there a difference between Jew hatred and anti-Semitism? It seems Jew hatred is just prejudice while anti-Semitism is a political force. No, I don't think so. I think it's the same thing. I don't know what it means is just prejudice. And I don't know that anti-Semitism is a political force. Where is it a political force? Certainly not in America. It doesn't have real political force. No, anti-Semitism represents, in the modern, it could represent hatred of Semites, which would be interesting because Hanania is a Semite. But it usually means hatred of Jews. Anti-Semitism usually means hatred of Jews, even though Semites are a broader category than just Jews. But I don't think you can make a difference between prejudice and political force. Yep, somebody thought criminal says thousands will be debanked in the UK allegedly. I'd like to see the stats, the data, which banks, and what the reasons were. I haven't seen evidence that thousands will be debanked. I think it's a political rallying call more than anything else. Somebody really screwed up with Nigel Farage, and that has created a whole industry now around. One other thing to complain about, one other thing to be viewed as a victim of. We live in a culture generally of people searching to be victims, right? Searching to squeeze you over their sense of victimhood. And that's true on the left, obviously, and it's true on the right as well. Yeah, I talked about this. The Canadian truckers were the bank accounts were denied to them by the government, and that was, I thought, one of the most horrific, authoritarian, disgusting things that I've seen done. I mean, the only way you should be allowed to do that is if you indict somebody, try them, and find them guilty. Then you can freeze their bank account. But I'm against the only other place. Well, actually, it's done all the time. It's done all the time by the RICO Act. The RICO Act allows the government to seize your assets, before you're found guilty. It's supposedly an act that to go after the mafia, but it's been gone after financiers all the time. And it's also part of the RICO Act, by the way. Anybody know who deployed the RICO Act for the first time against businessmen? Who froze businessmen's account and took their assets before trial for the first time in American history? Who did that first? Anybody know the name of the prosecutor? My favorite prosecutor, you should know this. Rudy Giuliani. Rudy Giuliani was the first man to use RICO against business people. Yeah. This is one of the reasons I despise the man. And then, of course, there's that, I forget what it's called now, but it's that where they can seize, if they think you're involved in drugs, they can seize your money. Like they find a bunch of money in your car, they can seize your car, they can seize your money, they can say, and before you've even had a trial. And you might never get it back, even if you're found innocent. The Supreme Court, of course, just ruled, hopefully will be ruling about something like that in the future. So, yes, these are horrible things, but what they did in Canada was particularly horrible, and the scale of it for political reasons, just despicable. And I talked about that at the time. All right, Michael says, there's a certain optimism and benevolence about Texans I don't see in other states. It's the last bastion of the American sense of life. Yeah, I think that's mostly true. I think that's somewhat true. I think there's also, and I've seen it, I also think there's also a very backward attitude in Texas once you get out of the cities, and a real, redneck perspective in Texas that is pretty disturbing and disgusting, that is not American at all. And look, I don't know what Silicon Valley is like anymore, but it used to be that Silicon Valley was the place where you really got that sense of benevolence and optimism. Optimism in particular. I don't know that still exists. Probably not, with given the pessimism over AI. Michael says, how does a person become delusional? What are the steps that make the phenomena occur? I don't know. I mean, that's again a question for psychologists. But my guess would be that it's a matter of evasion and evasion and evasion and evasion until reality becomes blurry and you're focused on the mythology that you create rather than on reality and truth, because you've evaded so often it's become a habit. Delusional is a state in which evasion is your modus operandi. Alejandro, if we could only have an arbitrary imaginary friend, then morality wouldn't be arbitrary. Yes, I love that formulation. Perfect. Yes. I'll say it again. If we could only have an arbitrary imaginary friend, then morality wouldn't be arbitrary. How does that work? Exactly. Mark says, well said, Yaron. Objectivism bridges the gap thoughts on atheist movement and potential outreach. Liberty-minded people like atheists for liberty. Yeah, I mean, absolutely. And we've tried and we continue to try. That is our audience. It should be our audience. Of course, we can also convince people to become atheists. I think I've done that to some people. But yes, if you've already got religion out of the way, it makes it much easier to provide with the moral guidance and the philosophy that Ayn Rand provides people. Right? Stephen says, thoughts on Tchaikovsky's 1812 overture. Amazing, beautiful, super emotional, super powerful, of course, very, very heroic and driven and powerful and inspiring, and yeah, an amazing, amazing composition. I'm a big fan of Tchaikovsky's music. Can Trump win a primary without partaking in a single debate? He might. I don't know. He might. I think he'll skip the first one. there is another path for Trump, which I find, I've been thinking about it. I don't know if he'll do it. But one thing that Trump could be doing is waiting until somebody emerges as, as the strongest alternative candidate to himself. As somebody who might be able to beat Biden. Because I actually think any of the other candidates, not any, most of the other candidates could beat Biden. Trump could then go to that person and basically say, look, I'll withdraw from the race, throw all my support behind you if you promise to the first thing you do when you get into the White House is pardon me. I do think that Trump is afraid of going to jail. And I think Trump loses to Biden. I think he's the only candidate who clearly loses to Biden. And if that's the case, he goes to jail. So maybe what happens as this realization hits him that he's going to jail, that he's going to lose to Biden and he's going to jail, maybe he cuts a deal. And the best way to cut a deal is not with the prosecution. The best way to cut a deal is with a future is the candidate who might win, and then pardon him. So I think this is why Vivek, for example, is going out of his way to say, I'll pardon Trump. I'm going to pardon Trump. First thing I'll do, I'll pardon Trump. Because, and I think that the challenge with that is, I don't think he can do that now with DeSantis, because he's ridiculed DeSantis. He's attacked DeSantis so much that I don't think he can back DeSantis. So it's going to have to be somebody other than DeSantis that he banks. Maybe it's Vivek. I don't know. But I think that's one of the plays that's open to him. I like number says, you said an interview is a sanction. Does that have implication for Adalja's interview with AOC when he said it was an honor to talk to her? I mean, I don't think you're sanctioning a member of, a member of the, what do you call it? A member of Congress. I mean, there's somebody who's been elected, who's a member of Congress. It's not an issue of Adalja sanctioning them, right? It's an issue of they are already well-known, established person. Their views are mainstream, the member of Congress. There's no question about Adalja's opposition to those views. And, I wouldn't have said it's an honor to speak to you, but, in the moment, I don't blame people for saying that when you're in the spotlight in front of a Congress person. Now, I haven't seen that interview. I don't know much about that interview. But yeah, you're in a particular context. So, yeah, I wouldn't blame him for doing that. But no, I don't think if you're in front of a congressperson, that is a sanction. But if you're in front of, it's just a random interview. I mean, God, I do a lot of interviews. And the reality is, I don't check them as thoroughly as probably I should. Everybody I give an interview to, I've at least given one interview that I regret in terms of somebody who I didn't want to sanction. But yeah, when you go on an interview, for the most part, you're sanctioning that person. I just don't think it's meaningful to say, I'm sanctioning a congressperson. What is that? I mean, they already have the status. You're not giving them anything they don't already have. And by the way, you're sanctioning somebody when you're debating them. The fact is, you're sanctioning when you're debating them. You're saying they are legit enough to debate. Their views are, and I've debated some pretty horrific people. And yeah, I know, I sanctioned them. I didn't approve of them because I was debating them. But, I sanctioned the fact that their point of view is a point of view out there in the culture that is, worthy of debate, I guess. Whether it's wolf communism, whether it's anarchist, crazy anarchist in Poland, and debating Brian Kaplan on anarcho-capitalism, which which is a horrible set of ideas. I've debated lots of socialists. Worse people than AOC. Wolf is way worse than AOC. Whoops, what did I do? Mark Thomas says, moderate religion, a kinder, gentler irrationality. Yeah. There is such a thing. I mean, we all know a lot of religious people who are just kinder and gentler. You just have to figure out where the line is, and what the context is in which you're having the discussion or having the debate. There's certain people I will not debate. Even the debate on anarcho-capitalism, I told the guy, I don't want to do the debate unless, there are like 2 or 3 people I will debate on anarcho-capitalism. I mentioned Brian Kaplan. You got Brian Kaplan. I'll debate Brian Kaplan because I have respect for Brian. But I wouldn't debate. There are a lot of people I wouldn't debate. People have asked me to debate, I don't know, somebody like Scott Horton on foreign policy. Won't debate him. There are a lot of people I won't get on stage with Noam Chomsky. There are a lot of people I just won't do. The exact context and everything, it's difficult. And I'm not saying I haven't made mistakes. And I'm not saying every single event and every single interview and every single debate I've done was right. And the audience is relevant. The context is relevant. How knowledgeable everybody is about whether I agree with those ideas or not is relevant. So a lot of relevant factors. Deciding on who to debate and who to interview with is not an easy thing. All right. PB says, part 1. Induction of a law of gravity relies upon probability in that we can assume the odds are negligible that a ball will fall up the next time you throw it. Also, okay, so let me deal with part 1. No, I don't think that's true. I think the probability that the ball will go up, given the conditions under which gravity works, is exactly 0. That's inductive knowledge. Inductive knowledge is not probabilistic. It's 0.000001 that it will go up. No, under these conditions, it will never go down. And that's certainty. It's not probabilistic. It's certain. Now, yes, you can create conditions in which the ball will go in the opposite direction. But that's why it's important to specify in physics, very important to specify the conditions. So, no, inductive law does not give you probabilistic. It sometimes does, but it can often give you certainty. And certainly with regard to gravity, I am certain, not small probability, but certain that the ball will fall. Okay, part 2. Also, the biological world is so complex that odds of creation by random chance is negligible. I don't know what that even means. To be therefore a creator must exist. This is also a probability-based argument, right? No. It's a completely arbitrary statement. We don't know how the biological world came into being. And the circumstances in which it came into being might have a probability that's very, very high. That is, if you take a particular mixture of particular chemicals in a particular state with a particular temperature and a particular lightning strike, the probability that a lightning strike affecting those chemicals in that temperature, in that environment, would bring about biology might be 90%. So no, the argument that now you would say, what's the probability that you have that? Well, it turns out that the probability of having that number of chemicals in that temperature, in that circumstances, with that whatever lightning or whatever caused it, it turns out the probability of that was 100% because that's what we had. But to leap from that to a creator is bizarre. And who created the creator? I mean, there's a million ways in which you can attack that, right? But that's completely arbitrary. You could say, the best you could say, the most you could say, I don't know how biological life started on Earth. And I think that's true. I don't know. And you could say that. And that would be completely legit. But then to leap from that to a creator is bizarre. Now, it's true that we have used God throughout the centuries, throughout mankind's history. We've used God as a vehicle to contain that which we don't know. That is, whenever we said, ooh, I don't know, it's God. That is how we've dealt with knowledge in the past. But science has taught us that that is wrong. That is not true. That we might not have the knowledge to know something now, but there's nothing to prevent us from having that knowledge one day. We know the means by which we attain that knowledge. So I might not know exactly how life, came to be on planet Earth, but I know that I have the tool to discover it one day. Scientists have the tool to discover it one day. In no circumstances is there an excuse to go from ignorance to God. All you can say is, I'm ignorant. I don't know. Austin, so to expand on my question, should a tech entrepreneur answer questions if asked about politics or economic issues, or just say I have no opinion? Well, you can say I have no comment. When you're not yet successful, I would say I have no comment. It's, I'm here to talk about my business. I'm not here about to talk economic or politics. And then, when you become the CEO of, a big company, you can talk. You can say exactly what you think. How would they deal with employee walkouts or media? Well, you just tell the media you're not here to talk about politics or economics. You're here to talk about your business. And you're not expressing an opinion right now about anything else other than your business. Just single-mindedly focus on creating weird and metal. You're not interested in commenting on the events of the day. That's how you deal with media. With employees, if they walk out, hire new ones. But this idea that employees are going to walk out on you because you won't take a stand on a particular thing might happen, but I still think it's pretty rare, and I still think you can find plenty of employees in Silicon Valley, particularly right now, who will come and work for you and do the work that is not going to require that. But yeah, I just stay out of it. I would just stay out of it until you have weight enough to be able to deal with the consequences. And that requires you to be successful first. All right, we're still short quite a bit of money, so if anybody wants to step in and help make that up, that would be fantastic. I've got my final questions. You don't have a lot of time if that is your intention, or if you'd like to do that. We don't have a lot of time. We have 90 people watching. $5 from everybody blows through. Just view it as a value for value. There are a lot of people who I think came late to the show. I hope you're enjoying it. I hope you're getting something out of it. A sticker with a little bit of dollars would show the appreciation for whatever it is that you get out of the show. All right. Raphael, says, hi, Yaron. Which sculptures do you have on your back? It looks, somebody asked me this just like yesterday or the day before yesterday. It looks beautiful. How do you choose those sculptures to buy? Art is super amazing to get inspiration. Yes, it is. So I assume you're talking about that sculpture. And I talked about this the other day. Somebody asked me about what that was. That is a David. You can see it's a David because you can't really see it because it's a little out of focus. I'm not going to play with the focus right now. But he has got his leg on Goliath's head. So this is a David just after David has chopped off Goliath's head. So this is a victorious David. I think it's beautiful. I think the pose is beautiful. The silhouette is beautiful. I think he's got kind of a confident, relaxed sense to it of victory, of success. He's sheathing his sword. You can't see the sword because the sword is broken. He's, it's a youthful but muscular body, and it's David after victory, and it's a 19th century sculpture. The sculptor, I don't have his name. I'll have to look it up and let you know. But it was made in the 19th century. The cast that I have there is actually a cast from the 19th century. I think my wife bought it for me off of a website that sells kind of antique art. It wasn't ridiculously expensive, which is pretty amazing given the quality of the piece and the history of it. And it's an original. It's an original casting from the 19th century. You have it right there. It is a beautiful and inspiring piece, and I'd love to surround myself with such pieces. How do I decide? Decide based on what inspires, what I find beautiful, what I think will go well in my home. I saw a sculpture with my wife, and I saw a sculpture in Italy. Marble, I think it was marble. It was gorgeous. It was really nice. 19th century, it was marble. Just this last trip in Rome. And it wasn't expensive. It was like $2,000. And we were very tempted to buy it. And then it was like, do I love it enough to see it every day and go, wow? And the answer at the end was no. So we skipped it, right? I want to surround myself with pieces of art where I go, wow, every time I see them. If it's just good, if it's just, then it just not, given that I've got so much art already, it's just not enough. I want it to be really a wow. I wanted to have that wow factor. And to really strike me and to inspire. So that's how I choose the art. It has to fit into my life, and given that I've got a lot of art, it has to elevate. It has to be one up. All right, MP Create says, hi, Yaron, what is the best way to make friends in a new city? Love the show, value for value. Thank you, MP, I really appreciate it. And thank you, Thought Criminal, who just did his first super sticker ever. Thank you, really appreciate that. And you can do that too, it's not that hard. I don't know. I'm not sure I'm the best person to ask about this. I think what you have to find is you have to find people in this new city that share some of your values. So whether it's colleagues from work or whether if you're an objectivist, finding other people interested in Ayn Rand, other objectivists that you can meet and befriend and associate with. I always do that. I look for the local objectivists and get together with them. Some I like, some I don't. I try to make friends with the ones I like, and I do that. But look for opportunities. You like, I don't know, you like whatever it is you happen to like. You like going to museums. You like the opera. You like baseball. You find people who like that, share that with you. But one thing is, if you're an objectivist, is find people who also love Ayn Rand and try to get in with them. Try to create a relationship with them. John says, what is going on between Belarus and Poland? Is this just a diversion? Well, it might be and it might not be. It's very dangerous what's going on with Belarus and Poland. Belarus is basically, at the forefront of the Putin regime. Belarus is completely subservient to Russia. It is a country that depends completely on Russia pretty much for everything, including the existing dictator had to use Russian troops in order to suppress basically an uprising against him, I think before COVID. So Belarus is a place that is now dominated by Russia. And Poland is, of course, a NATO member. So what I think what the Russians are hoping is to distract Poland and distract the West so that they can distract them from supporting Ukraine and distract them from what Ukraine is doing and helping Ukraine. And they're trying to create some tension across the Belarusian-Polish border, which has had tension in the past over immigration. Belarus tried to encourage Muslims to come to Belarus, and then they took them to the Polish border and they encouraged them to cross over to Poland. Poland did not view this very kindly, stopped that activity. And there's still, tragically, Muslims stuck in Belarus who can't cross over to Poland, and there's nothing for them in Belarus, some of whom were starving and struggling, and it's a truly tragic situation. Belarus used them as pawns. And so what happened, if you remember, with Prigozhin, is when the coup, the Prigozhin's mutiny or coup was ended, the deal was that he would take himself and his troops to Belarus. And one of the things that is feared is that he will try to create some tension on the border between Belarus and Poland, again, to distract from what's going on in Ukraine, which could potentially bring NATO into the war. Now, Putin also, add to this the fact that Putin, was it a week and a half ago, gave this speech where I think I talked about this on the show, where he basically said that, Poland owes its borders to Russia. Stalin, in his benevolence, gave Poland a bunch of land that didn't belong to Poland, and that Poland should be thankful to Russia. And he threatened Poland, and generally a kind of tone of, we're going to go after Poland, right? Which is one of the reasons Ukraine needs to win, so that Russia ends its ridiculous ambitions, right? But so anyway, all of this is, I think, a distraction, but a dangerous distraction, an attempt at a distraction, very dangerous, because to the extent that it brings NATO into the war, then, this war could really escalate and could really become nasty and could become nuclear. So I'm much more worried about the war becoming a nuclear war on the Polish-Belarusian front than in Ukraine. I wouldn't be surprised if you started seeing Russia move troops along the Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia border just to rattle their sabers, just to create, again, a diversion and just to scare the West and to scare NATO. Of course, I think NATO would crush Russia very quickly without nukes. But nukes, wow, I mean, that's a whole other dimension, and that's the end of it could be the end of the world as we know it. So let's hope that never happens. But Putin is playing with fire, and Putin is egging on Prigozhin and the Belarusians to create a diversion on the Polish border. Frank, $50. Thank you, Frank. Thanks for all you do. Foremost seriousness still has a place in the world. I'm glad you approve what I do, and thanks for all the support. Really appreciate it. Richard says, this will be the last question, probably, unless somebody jumps in, but it is the last question. We're still about $200 short, so it would be nice to make that up. Some advice at Austin, media questions. For the entrepreneur. Media questions follow business success, which follows delivering value to customers, which follows a valuable product or service. For Yaron, shareholder value follows customer value. Yeah, I mean, I think that's right, but the context for everything is shareholder value. Yes, in order to create it, you have to create value for customers. Otherwise, what are you doing? What are you in business for, right? But you're not going to create any shareholder values. But the end is not the customer. The end is you, the owner, You know, and that's value for the owners. So, but again, how you do it, what that means, I still think that you know, shareholder value is like shareholder value is like happiness, right? It's like you know, flourishing. To flourish, you have to do these things. You have to. One of the things you have to do is to be productive. You have to create customer value. All right. Thank you, guys. Really, really appreciate the support. Thank you for all the super chatters, people who ask questions, people who use stickers. Amazing. Those of you who are not watching live or not listening live who would like to support the Yaron Brook Show, you can do so on Patreon, patreon.com/Yaron Brook. You can do it on PayPal, Yaron Brook Show. You can do it through yaronbrookshow.com/support. I will see you all. No show tomorrow, although I will be releasing my Ukraine talk tomorrow. So it will be premiering tomorrow evening. So hopefully you'll all watch that. Those of you who haven't watched it already on the Ayn Rand Institute site, feel free to use stickers to support that as well. And I will see all of you on Monday for another news roundup. Have a great weekend. Bye.